So a lot of you will be return audience, as it were, so you know the format here. It's intended as a very informal chat on key topics of the day. And the hottest topic, obviously, at the moment for all us planning people is the draft NPF 4. And delighted to welcome Pam to chat about that. Pam will be well known to most of you, I'm sure, but just to give her the proper introduction, she's currently head of planning at Fife Council, had various other roles around Scotland, including some development planning, so it's a good, useful mix of the development management and the development planning. She's currently chair of the Heads of Planning, HOPS as we call it, and a past convener of RTPI Scotland. So a very good perspective, someone who's been very involved, and I know from lots of discussions that she's someone who's very passionate about planning and the planning system in Scotland. So I'm certainly very much looking forward to what she has to say. So I'll pass over to Elaine for the first bit of the chat.
Thanks, Neil, and hi, Pam. Good to see you. So, yeah, I think you and I are often on social media, and I think you put out a tweet last Wednesday afternoon, you know, sort of saying we've all got to rearrange our, you know, our diaries for last Wednesday when Tom Arthur finally launched NPF, and we've all been going, you know, when's it going to be coming? When's it going to be coming? And it's 130 pages long, and we've only got 45 minutes. So you'll be glad to know we're not going to be page turning. We're not going to be going into the detail. I thought we maybe just look at kind of some of the key threads, because I know certainly I've been through it, you know, kind of once or twice, but we'll have to keep kind of going back through it. So I thought we'd start with a kind of spatial strategy, and when you know, it's about sustainable places, livable places, productive places, distinctive places, and the draft, it pains to say, you know, that there's no one single policy. There's 35 of them. There's no single policy, you know, or development that's going to deliver those places. So they have these 6 overarching principles: compact growth, local living, balanced development, conserving and recycling assets, urban and rural synergy, and just transition. Now, the Minister and the Chief Planner, I've listened to them both now, call it bold and ambitious. So I suppose my first question to you are, you know, what are your thoughts? Is any of it really new? Or hasn't planning been trying to achieve all of these, you know, these overarching principles for a wee while?
Yeah, well, like you, Elaine, absolutely welcomed the document when it was published, and then I saw it was 133 pages. So I took time last night to have my second, a bit more detailed skim read through. But I think anyone who's really interested in that document and wants to really help shape it will have many reads of it, because the devil is always in the detail, as we say. I guess I agree that planning has been trying to achieve many of the principles set out in the draft for years. But I guess have we really achieved these principles consistently across Scotland in each and every site? And I don't think so. And of course, there's a lot of high quality development out there. A lot of really good developments are brought to bear. But however, I do believe that collectively we can do better. We can create better, healthier places. And the draft strategy, you know, as I read it again last night, or skim read it, I thought to myself, you know, this draft strategy is really asking us all to raise our game. So climate change and nature recovery are principal and primary guiding features, or principles as they call them. And I think that's where I would agree that it is ambitious. You know, I do think it starts to raise the game, was the phrase that came into my own head. And I think the scope of it's about right. I quite like the structure. You know, you read through the different principles. It says the key things. They are a huge number of policies, many detailed. Some of them, like policy 10 and sustainable development, very, very long, very detailed. But it's the terminology that's it's the terminology within each that will be the focus for all of us to consider and comment on. You touched on the principle of balanced development, and that caught my attention when I was going through it last night. And it would appear that MPF is seeking through the planning system to balance and to influence markets. And I think that's interesting. I'm sure it'll attract a lot of discussion. I really support the draft considering population. I've been asking for that for a long time and seeking to rebalance. As a country, we have a real challenge around that, and land use has a role to play in it. But we do need to think through how, through the planning system, we help in achieving those aims. And I think there needs to be quite a lot of conversations around that to help tease out the challenges and the opportunities.
So it's interesting, you know, kind of raise your game or a call to arms, or because you can be bold and ambitious about the policy doesn't need to change. And we've talked about this, I don't know how many reforms we've done when it's about actually, you know, behaviours. And, you know, I quite like the fact if that's an encouragement to everybody to be bold and ambitious with their development, you know, and bold and ambitious in what we can achieve. But sometimes I feel it stays on the paper and doesn't, you know, come out into the decision-making process. Do you think this is going to help them?
Well, I suppose there's two ways to look at it. I used to talk about when you write a policy document, don't leave it sitting on the shelf gathering dust. That makes me feel old now. So I guess there's an analogy of it's up in the clouds, and when do you draw it down? But it is that. It's about how does everybody use a development plan to actually affect change and affect change in the right way. So I think it's ambitious in saying, you know, here are some fundamentals that, you know, as a country, we have to get right for our children, our children's children, for future generations. We have to get right. It's not just about the decision making; it's actually about the quality that's submitted, as well, and ensuring that's taken right through the assessment.
And so, you know, as you say, it's kind of how it's then applied. And I thought we'd maybe have a look at, you know, just a couple of the sort of go through each of the principles and have a look at a couple of the policies. There's 35, so we're not going to kind of go through them. But interested from both the private and the public sector, what does this mean? You know, what does this mean when I'm putting in an application or when you're looking at an application? And so that, you know, the first one I thought we'd maybe kind of touch on, it's sustainable places. And we see, you know, that the first point is that when considering all development proposals, significant weight is going to be given to the global climate emergency. What does that mean in practice for the applicant and for the planning officer? What do I need to put in my planning application, or what are you going to ask me to demonstrate that?
Good question, because I think this is one of the policies that does jump out at one when we read it, and the word significantly jumps out as well, getting back to it's actually about the precise wording of a policy that's going to help make it effective or actually open to challenge. In simple terms, when you read that policy, it means that we have to take climate change seriously. That word significantly, I'm sure, wasn't just slipped in by somebody. I'm sure it was given a lot of thought, and the emphasis on it is there on purpose. And I'm sure listeners and yourself will have followed COP26, and that will have given many of us a sharp reminder of the responsibilities we have in shaping and creating places. Policy 2 needs a bit of digesting. Yes. Part C, I thought, was interesting, where it talks about development proposals which will generate significant emissions, not just on their own, but cumulatively. And how is that assessed consistently? Now, I don't have the answer to that yet, but it sets out offsetting measures against emissions. And again, how do we get consistency in this interpretation and assessment? And my initial thoughts last night were, well, is there a tool? I sometimes think about this, is there that magic tool out there? I never know how to get it. I can think about what I want. What's that tool out there? Maybe government are working on it. I don't know. Behind MPF that is used by applicants, by communities, by planning authorities, which allows at a really high principled level a calculation of impact and of the potential offset. And actually, I think that should be done for local development plans as well. So I think one of the things that is clear is we need to ensure that planning authorities, that our planners within authorities are climate literate, that they skill up and their knowledge around this area. And one of the things that definitely, I guess one thing that definitely jumped out at me is across the draft, I really consider it results in further complexity. It doesn't provide for a simpler, more streamlined planning system. And there are more assessments. And many discussions have been in the past decade about the number of assessments, the complexity in dealing and submitting, and then assessing and determining an application. And this adds a number of new assessment to that. So I think there are some challenges ahead in how we resource that, how we finance those if one's submitting an application as well.
I think that it's the cost of, as you mentioned, putting all the assessments in, but that I suppose the consistency across, so that everybody, wherever you're putting in your application, it's the same kind of assessment. So you mentioned obviously Scottish Government, presumably HOPs, that could be kind of things that you would work at that level to feed it down, would you?
We will be given consideration. We'll be coming together as planning authorities to really get our heads around this, because I think we've all got a duty to help government sharpen up the document. It's an incredibly difficult thing to write. Getting a policy document, a development plan right first go is pretty difficult. And that's why we have an engagement process. That's why we go out and seek views at the stages of such plans. So we'll be coming together and really discussing that and shaping it and thinking about how that's delivered, both with policy colleagues and development management colleagues. If you're a case officer and you're sitting on an application with 35 national policies, where do you start? How do you do that? And I'm sure we'll have some authorities almost taking some dummy applications through to just check it off and test it.
Yeah. So the next one, the livable places, that kind of covers the number of issues, and 20-minute neighbourhoods, sustainable transport's in there, blue and green infrastructures there, and of course delivering housing itself. And policy 9 is the one on quality homes, and it requires the local development plans to identify a housing target for the area, which must be, at least the minimum 10-year all housing tenure requirement. And we've got those. And there was obviously a lot of discussion in the lead up to what's that going to be. The Scottish Government put out their minimums, and then those figures have gone up. But what's not in here is what we're all used to, is the reference to maintaining a 5-year effective housing land supply. It seems to be a change now to maintaining a pipeline of deliverable housing land. And John McNerney mentioned that when he came on, when last November, when they launched the position statement, he talked about the kind of pipeline. Do you see that as a change in approach, going from the housing land allocations to the planning authority having to make sure that pipeline keeps moving?
I think the terminology is definitely different, and I think this is probably one of the policies that everybody was waiting to go to. What's been determined, what's coming out, and I'm sure, particularly as heads of planning, we'll be considering this draft policy. I think particularly against what is the role of the planning authority, what can the planning authority do, and what it can't do. And part B of the policy refers to long-term sites, but when I read it, I thought, well, how will the planning authority's role sit with market demand? And part C, I think, really helpfully talks about submission of a statement of community benefit. And I thought, fantastic, because that gives developers and investors a real opportunity to promote the positives, not just about their site, but that wider direct and indirect benefits, of which there are many, and some of them very, very significant to an area. So I think that's really positive. Part I grabbed my attention, and that part of the policy talks about being supported by an agreed timescale for build out, and that gets to the heart of what you're talking about, Elaine. How do you get that pipeline of sites? And whilst through a planning consent, the start and the phasing of development can be managed where necessary, greater thought will be needed as to how does a planning authority require a private developer to build X number of units in a given period. So that's quite a turn, and I don't have the answer for that yet. Not my two first skim reads. And a key word within that policy is deliverable. We always talk about it, and I have many conversations with colleagues and investors, and with investors, and how can they demonstrate that a site is absolutely deliverable, sorry, at an early stage of promoting that site. And that's difficult because that takes money, that takes investigations and all the rest of it. But this will be a challenge for forthcoming local development plans. Not a new challenge, it's always been there, but we need to be more open and honest. We need more open and honest conversations and submissions into LDPs to really help shape what is actually deliverable. So I think that this needs quite a lot of, firstly, understanding from government on where they're coming from with the wording in there, and my reading of how they feel a planning authority can require a developer to deliver X units in a given timescale. It's almost coming at it from the other end, so to speak. So yeah, I think that needs a bit of thought.
Yeah, and probably, you know, sitting in there will be the gate check. You know, we've got the, you know, waiting for the you know, the regulations on the local development plans, but that was, you know, to move, I suppose, the housing discussion to the gate check stage, and to make sure that when the local development plan is coming forward at that stage, it's going to be allocating enough land to keep that pipeline, you know, kind of going. I suppose I spend most of my life looking for development on ones that are on unallocated lands. I did take some comfort that there was a policy in there that did allow new homes on land that's not identified if there's not, you know, the pipeline carrying forward. So there is that, you know, the process that we go through at the moment of justifying it, even though it's not on allocated land. So the next one is productive places. And that's about supporting new and expanded businesses and promoting alternative ways of working to achieve a green recovery. And I'd be interested in your view, because I'm not entirely sure what that means. You know, what is a green recovery? Policy 16 requires LDPs to set out their business and their employment allocations, which support a greener, fairer and more inclusive society. So I suppose, from what you've read so far, is that a change from the business and employment allocations we have at the moment? Is it a move from significant economic benefits that we've all been looking at and demonstrating? You know, what is a green recovery to you?
Well, to answer the first part, I think there is a shift there, because there was the previous focus on the economy of Scotland, and there still is a focus on that, but it's wider. And I guess that sits firmly with the outcomes that the Scottish Government are seeking to achieve, and councils, you know, with the Scottish Government. So those are common terminologies, if I can use it,
Yes.
that are flowing through, and they flow through the document. You know, what is a green economy? It can be lots of different things. What I didn't check is that in at the end, and is it defined at the back of the document? I think it really is about focusing on whether that's green jobs, renewables, looking at opportunities where you're addressing climate change, and it's bringing all of that together, whether it be about what you build, where you build it, how you create jobs, the types of jobs, all of these things. So, and obviously biodiversity and nature are, you know, those aspects have come through loud and clear.
Yes.
In this document. But you only had to tune into COP26, and I mean, I didn't have a lot of time to do it during the day. I was trying where I could to catch up with it some evenings, but you know, that was something that definitely came through about biodiversity and nature, and the fundamental importance of that. And so I think government's picked that up and really shaping that through the document. But in part, the policy itself, perhaps might be more, it's about location, but it's perhaps far more than before. It will be about differing scales of employment land. And I guess I started to think about, smaller employment and business opportunities integrated into new communities. We saw, in Fife and planning authorities practically across Scotland, saw a huge increase in what I was calling the Costa del Sol extensions. People were where they had they were able to financially, they've been putting in planning applications to extend their home or put a building in their garden if it needed consent. All of these different things. We have fundamentally changed the way we've been leading our lives in 18 months, and we're now trying to grasp, well, how does that work through in terms of future work styles, or indeed future ways how we lead our lives. So I'm expecting that to play out more as we receive proposals. We're seeing that already. But, will we see more developments coming forward where they have a hub at the centre of it?
Yep.
We see some, but very, very few, where you can go, you don't have to work in your house, you don't have to go into the office, but you can go and you can catch a coffee, meet people in your community, connect with them, network with them, but crack on with your work at the same time. I think the draft wording on how allocations will support a fairer and more inclusive society kind of vexed my mind. It was getting late last night as I was going through each policy, but I thought, oh, that's interesting. And it's about how the policies have taken the terminology of government, if I can put it that way, the terminology of policy and outcomes, and expressing that in policy. But we have to be clear, what does a fairer and more inclusive society actually mean? And how does the case officer actually assess that when they're sitting with the application in front of them? So, I keep saying we need more conversations, but it is around that precise wording and understanding, where's government from? What are they seeking to achieve out of policies like that? And then reflecting on, well, is it worded correctly, or does it need to be shaped a bit more differently?
Yeah, it's certainly that guidance, isn't it, from both for the applicant putting it in and for the planning officer kind of assessing. I've had a quick look, and green recovery isn't one of the defined terms at the back of it. No, so we
That's
don't have
one
any
for you to pen, Elaine.
Yes. That's right. So the final kind of theme is the distinctive places and the focus on city and town centres. As we thought, obviously there's been a lot about encouraging people to kind of go back into city and town centres, and part of that's about city centre and town living. And we actually had a webinar on encouraging living in Aberdeen City earlier today, and obviously that's about reusing vacant or derelict buildings. It seems to me that's quite a challenging one. It's difficult. We don't see a lot of the mainstream residential developers going into the city centres. But yeah, I see that part of the requirement is going to have to be, on that brownfield, on that redevelopment. So part of the allocations for LDP is going to be specifically towards that. I suppose you're interested in your views on and how you see that being delivered. Is that an opportunity for local authorities to use their compulsory purchase powers? Do more land assembly? Is that what's going to encourage people, to come back and do the kind of city centre living?
I think it's probably a cocktail of a lot of that. I mean, there are many successful redevelopments across the country which have been led by the private sector that haven't required public sector funding or intervention. However, the draft sets out a strategy that really does focus much more brownfield than on greenfield. And if that is the national approach, then it will be for the market to respond to that. So, I do think if this is bold and ambitious around this area, then businesses, developers, investors will look at that and consider, well, where does that sit with their business model, with their business and what they're seeking to shape. There will be of course, there'll be more challenging brownfield sites that require public sector investment. And this is one of the draft policies, along with the infrastructure first policy. I really would have liked to have seen the draft delivery plan being published alongside, so there's an understanding of how the national plan will be delivered. you know, I talked earlier about that plan sitting in the digital clouds, and when do you bring it down each day to have a good look at it? But unless there's clarity on how is it actually going to be delivered, where's the dosh? Where's the money where it needs to be intervened? So I'm really disappointed that the draft delivery plan isn't there. Local development plans will need to have it at that stage. So for a national development plan, I'm disappointed. I noted the minister in his statement in Parliament talked about it might have been presumptuous of him to submit it. I wouldn't have taken it like that. I would have found it to be helpful. I think it would have assisted the debate that we will have across sectors and with communities, and it would have assisted our collective understanding of, right, this is where we're trying to get to, but how are we going to get there? You know, I talk about jigsaw. How do you stitch all that together? How do you create that final picture? So I'm really disappointed that isn't there, and I hope the discussion will start to flow in that.
And when you think back to the reforms, you know, it was all about infrastructure and delivery and making sure that we were actually going to see these things coming forward, because there had been all the blockages before. So, you know, hopefully if everybody makes those kind of comments kind of going back, then we might see that coming forward, you know, at the kind of next stage. I wonder, just kind of then taking that a wee bit further, and one of the questions that's already come up to me is, okay, we've now got a draft NPF4, what weight do planners put on it during the kind of consultation period? You know, it's a material consideration, but how much regard should I have to it now already when if I'm putting my application together? Have you had a time to think about that?
I was going to ask you that question, Elaine.
My answer will depend on my application.
I guess really what we've chatted through this afternoon is that there's many of the principles in the draft NPF that are already there. They're already in planning policy. They're already in guidance. There's already what developers and investors do in bringing forward good quality development. So designing new places should be incorporated into these principles now. And I personally don't think too much weight can be given to a consultative draft that may or may not substantially change. Look at the debate even you and I are having, the discussion and the questioning and the detail. So it's one of the questions I will be posing to my legal colleagues, and we'll be sharing that, no doubt, across hops. But I think at those early consultative draft stages, and it's to go through Parliament as well, you know, it's to get that level of scrutiny, which will be an interesting process. So I think it's only really as it starts to go more through the process, as it starts to shape up a bit more, will it? But there's a lot in there that's already there. We would already be taking account of it. So, you know, I don't think, of course, it'll be a big issue for some where you're looking at precise wording and one's wishing wherever you're coming to use it for or again you know, absolutely I'm sure there will be many discussions on that.
It'll be interesting to see how much parliamentary intervention there'll be, given how much there was in terms of the you know, the bill itself, and you know, it had the most amendments to legislation, so that will be really kind of interesting. Sticking with planning applications, the ministers obviously promised new fee regulations, you know, by the end of the year. And I noticed that NPF4 is suggesting that there'll be a move to planning authorities recovering full cost recovery, and that there'll be proportionate but realistic charges for additional services. Additional resources for planning authorities are going to be linked to performance monitoring and improvement. Just wondered, you know, in terms of the challenges that local authorities are facing at the moment. I think we all talk about ring fence the planning application fees, and everything will be fine. But that never happens. Just again, what's your thoughts in terms of what we might see in terms of the fee regs and how it's going to help your, you know, and planners across Scotland?
Well, I mean, I welcome the fee regulations, and I don't know obviously what's in them, but if it's something akin to what was proposed, but fundamentally there's never been a more important time to properly resource planning authorities. And heads of planning Scotland, we got this on the then minister's table over 10 years ago, and during that decade, each year, each authority has set out its performance against national targets. And there has been improvements throughout that period. There has been challenges in the past 18 months. So kind of we've done our bargain, and apart from an extent, some increase in the majors, which really only the cities benefited from, there hasn't been that coming forward. So in real terms, it's well out of touch, well out of date. RTP, there's been a lot of research done around this. RTPI research showed a reduction in planning budgets of 42% since 2029, and since that was done, that will have fallen further, with a third of planning department staff cut over the same period. Despite that, performance was improving throughout that period. Now, application numbers have been falling, but with that, the income, and there's very significant levels of income through applications drops. So HOPS, we've listened and considered how planning officers are feeling just now and over the past few years. We've responded by further engaging with Tom Arthur, the new planning minister, but current fees have fallen well behind inflation, even inflation itself. And with the 49 new and unfunded duties on the Planning Act, and just thinking, we touched on it earlier, the draft NPF, in addition to all of that, places further complexity on an authority, on many, but on a planning authority. And it's not clear how the Scottish Government have considered this against performance timescale to determine applications. So really what's getting put to us consistently is lumping a lot more stuff at planning authorities, but year on year we've to have improved performance with a third less staff. So it's very challenging. Now, some of that I really enjoy as a leader in Fife Council, because we should always be seeking continuous improvement and making our business as efficient as possible. HOPS did some really important research, I think, with SIPFA, and the last one was done in 2019. And all the HOPS research is on that website. And that confirmed that the fees collected don't meet the costs of delivering full cost recovery of planning service. It came in at just under 33%. And for development management service, just under 43%. And when you looked at the core planning application process itself, it was just over 65.5%. Those are averages, and there's real differentials across authorities. It's really good to see the draft MPF tucked in at the back talks about investing in the planning service and moving towards full cost recovery. But we've been talking about moving towards for far too long. And I probably, as a chair of Heads of Planning Scotland, have got a bit impatient at that wording. So now we are directly seeking clarity from government to make this a policy within this parliamentary period. And we're seeking commitment, not just for planning authorities, but all involved in development resourcing. So really, Elaine, it's time to address years of disinvestment.
Mm-hmm. And in terms, obviously, we've all had to kind of adapt and change, working from home. I'm in the office today, but a lot of the time still working from home, and obviously planners and applicants alike. I have heard some concerns from applicants about difficulties in now getting hold of planning officers that are still working from home, because some of them don't have mobile phones, and perhaps what's perceived as a reluctance now to have face-to-face meetings. And also that concern that maybe behind the scenes there's not the same discussion between planning and environment, or planning and kind of roads. I don't think anybody is suggesting that all planners need to get back into the office, kind of tomorrow. But have HOPS given any thoughts to what the new norm might mean for planning officers and how they can kind of combine the new way of working with delivering that improved service?
Yeah, I mean, I guess councils are rightly following the COVID guidance, and that seems to be strengthening again as we see the rise in cases. Within my own authority, we do have a small number of staff each day who are into the office, and that's for a whole number of reasons. And we continue to shape up our future work styles. Earlier today, I was trying to finalise designs of our new office space, of which we'll be sharing with environmental services and business and employability, and that's the right mix in there. I'm aware of concerns and perceptions that planning authorities are planning officers are difficult to reach, not just from some of your clients, but from members of the public. You know, our main phone line isn't yet up and working because those colleagues continue to work from home. But I'm also aware of the pressures that planning officers have been under and continue to be under. I'm acutely aware of that within my own service. I can only reflect, I guess, in Fife, and colleagues have been carrying those heavy workloads, and they are taking longer to respond, and I've sought to be quite open and honest about that. Communication is a top priority for improvement. Today, I had another 2 emails into my box, investors or agents, really concerned about the speed in which we are responding. And I agree with them. I understand their concerns, and I understand that we need to try and do better. So we've had in Fife a communications project running for a number of months now to look at what we can automate. We've tried to automate more. How can we streamline process? How can we automate? How can we allow my colleagues to have the tools they need to better do the job, to make them more productive, to make them more efficient? And I do constantly remind them of the importance of communicating timidly and turning those around. And I think I am pushing digital solutions in that. So, I don't know how people would respond if we put chatbots in there rather than the real planning officers. And I think I think there's a transition we have to do there between the real life planner and the bot. And probably more than anybody, I will struggle with that because I like to have a blether. I like to talk to people face to face because I think you get so much more out of a conversation than that. But given what I've just outlined with the challenges we've got basically in running our business as planning authorities, with the resources we've got and the lack of funding, then those are fundamental. Those are fundamental challenges that we do have.
Yeah. I think you kind of touched on that point. Even if you were to get an email that says it's going to be 2 weeks before I'm going to be able to come back to it, it's that time sometimes where you get no response, at all from the
and that's why we've introduced some automation, Elaine, to try and set customers' expectations. Where it's difficult for me is when we set expectations, then we still don't meet them. I think that's where rightly agents and applicants and others and members of the public have an absolute right to not be particularly happy about that.
Yeah, and that probably takes us kind of full circle. I'm conscious there are some questions to the encouraging, both sides to be bold and ambitious, and deal with something and let's get on and let's kind of deliver development. And it's going to be interesting, obviously, to see in terms of the consultation, and hopefully there'll be a lot of workshops and discussion groups that come together before March to help kind of shape it a little bit more, I suppose. Neil, Pam and I could talk all afternoon because we haven't even touched on golf yet, because that's obviously the next set of questions, but I'll hand back to you to take a couple of questions from the audience.
Thanks. I was going to ask whether there was anything missing, but that might get you on to talking about, there needs to be a policy on golf, so let's not go there. Inevitably, because you've had such a wide-ranging discussion, you've picked up on a lot of the things that were being asked, but just to round it off, two maybe a bit more focused questions on housing, and because they're quite focused, it might be that it's more about the detail and you can't really respond, but I'll ask, and maybe between the two of you, you might be able to answer. The first one's quite a short one. How is housing for the elderly covered, including care? I'll leave you thinking about that for a minute and I'll ask the next one. The phrase to require a developer to deliver a certain amount of units / land is reasonable. However, some housing developers, medium or regional, operate a model of build to order, the buyer ordering, on sites of between about 50 and 150 units. rather than build volume of the same capacity or more. How might developers in this position respond positively to this new policy requirement, or how does the housing developer respond to this? So I think maybe that second question is more around, are some of the policies about housing needing a bit of refinement to cope with differences between the size of the house builder and the size of the site? So I don't know, Pam, are you able to comment on either or both of those questions?
Yeah, I can take them both. I'll take the second one first, if you don't mind, Neil.
Sure.
I think that really picks up on the point that I was making. It's what's the role of the planning authority in there? And yes, it might be different depending on the scale of one's business, house building business, but it might not. Because we really don't see many sites now where people are putting up a number of units ahead of sales, and that tends to flow through and filter through. Just in the same way we don't see scale of land banking that we used to see many years ago. We've changed, our markets and businesses have changed. I do think that needs a bit more thought, and that's what I was saying earlier. In terms of housing for the elderly, I haven't zoomed in on that level of detail, but it's really important. We've got an ageing population. How do we create communities, and how do we create facilities within our existing built communities that allows for that socially? So yeah, I mean, I think that's an important aspect. I do pick up from the draft that, and I welcome it, that we really need to look at what's the need in an area. You take a town or a particular village, what's the need in that village, and how do we shape development proposals that actually meet the need in that community?
And I think that's been an interesting theme of the whole conversation about partly the more we read, the more we'll pick up, but also it is throwing up a lot of questions, things that we'll be looking for a bit more guidance and some follow-up on, and appreciating that this is now a development plan document. So you can't expect a huge amount of detail necessarily from a development plan document. But there will have to be some follow-up there. I'll just bring it to a close because we do like to keep more or less to time, and I take Elaine's point that we could talk about this forever and ever and probably still not answer a lot of the most important questions. So thank you both, particularly thank you to Pam for giving up your time and coming and giving your thoughts, and really interesting what you had to say. Thank you all, the audience. We do really appreciate everyone tuning in, whatever the appropriate word is for what you do to join a webinar. Again, just to confirm, a recording will be available. So if you want to check back, or as I said before, pass it on to colleagues, that will be coming in the next few days. And you can see there details of the next session. We're taking a bit of a break while we all go away and read it in much more detail. And what we're going to do is the next Planning Live will be Elaine, myself and Karen having a chat about MPF4. So details of that, if they're not on our website at the moment with the chance to book, if you keep an eye, then those will pop up, and we'd be really pleased if you all came along and heard our thoughts, having had a chance to consider the detail of it, and indeed by then having had a chance to talk to a lot of you and pick up your thoughts and had various chats. So very much looking forward to that. So thanks again to Pam, to Elaine, to all of you, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.